So welcome everybody to today's session, just to get back into a part of ourselves that's a little more relaxed and begin to learn how to connect with that area, that space in a more predictable and reliable way. And the ultimate objective is to be able to tune into that state of stillness even during activity. But for the time being, even to use it opportunistically is valid. So when you need it, it's there. So we're going to give you some techniques today where you can access that deep inner state of stillness. So let's begin with just a very simple technique here now. So we'll close our eyes and we're sitting comfortably upright. And we're just bringing the attention to be aware of the breath. And all we're doing now is just allowing the awareness to flow with the breath. This should be a very effortless process. We call it the principle of least effort. So you're using the least amount of effort possible to let the awareness just simply follow the breath as it moves in and out. And immediately you should begin to feel a de-escalation in the thought process. The thoughts can still be there, and it's important not to try and stop the thoughts, but just simply to continually divert or to just redirect the awareness back to the breath. As soon as you're aware that you're not aware of the breath, in that moment, you just return the awareness to the breath. Now, if you want to delve deeper into this process, this is a form of mindfulness meditation, actually. What we do is we can begin to observe the breath in a way of engaging the curiosity, and that in turn will help us hold the attention to the breath. So what I want you to do now is just slightly revise the practice, and now I want you to observe the breath with the attitude of a sort of a detached curiosity, that you're observing as if you're a scientist trying to understand the length of the breath. And then you might modify that observation, and now we're trying to look at the smoothness of the breath, whether the breath is flowing smoothly, maybe slightly less evenly. Again, the objective is not to try and change the breath in any way. It's really just this process of passive observation. And another thing that we can do, it's a very powerful practice, we can actually bring the awareness to rest momentarily in the gap between the in-breath and the out-breath. See if you can do that. So firstly, locate that pause at the end of the in-breath. Or the end of the out-breath. Again, if the thoughts intrude or you become aware of sensations or any external sounds, that's okay. We're not resisting here. We're just noting them and then returning the awareness back to the breath. So it's an extremely easy process. And it just requires your commitment, really, just to stay with the practice for, let's do it for another 60 seconds. And then gradually you can bring your awareness now back to the physical body. You can feel the weight of the body in the chair, the pressure of the feet on the floor. Become more engaged with your external surroundings, and then gradually you can open your eyes. The main sort of test of the effectiveness of that practice is really just to now examine the mind itself and just observe whether or not you feel calmer or not. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit today about anxiety and the lockdown and some sort of techniques that we can apply to keep things in proportion. So, first point to note is when we're talking about anxiety, which is a very common phenomenon these days, all too common, what we're generally finding is that people experience that as both a physical reaction, but also you could say like a state of turmoil, internal mental turmoil, or an absence of peace. And I think it's important that we can begin to share some strategies where we can de-energize the anxiety reaction to try and take the wind out of its sails a little bit. The problem with anxiety is more twofold, really. It feeds on itself, so that the more that you give it awareness and attention, the more you're actually energizing the unhelpful mental state. And also, to some degree, it affects the people around you as well. So to some degree, it's contagious, or if not contagious, at least it can actually extend the suffering beyond those that are experiencing it to those around them who care for those people. So I think it's a good thing to share some techniques that we can help ourselves and others to firstly understand what's going on when anxiety is occurring. If you actually hold the state of anxiety and just observe it, as it were, from the position of an external observer, and that in itself is a bit of a skill, but we noticed when we were doing the breathing exercises that there's the breath, and then there's that part of you that is observing the breath. There's a part of you that feels slightly separate from what's going on. I think it's true that normally when we're thinking, when we're in a stream of thoughts, we're actually captivated by those thoughts. We're caught within the thought stream itself. And what meditation enables us to do is to establish a separate beachhead or a separate platform from which we can observe the thoughts in a more objective way without getting so subjectively caught. That often one of the best strategies you can do when you're feeling anxious is to just step back and just wait. Don't try and change anything. Don't try and force anything, but just simply wait. It's often difficult for an anxiety state to maintain its hold on you if you simply wait and observe it and just watch it. So I'm not going to ask you to replicate anxiety, but why don't we just close our eyes again for a minute, and this time just be aware of the fact that you're thinking. And when a thought comes up, instead of investing any analysis of the thought or any emotional energy, just tag it as a thought. You don't even have to describe the thought, you just say thought. Another thought comes, thought. You know, in biology, there's a process called tag and release. It's what they do when they're trying to estimate population numbers of animals. They tag it and they let it go. So you tag the thought with the word thought and then you release it. And you'll notice as you do this, actually, an interesting thing happens. You start to experience a little sense of spaciousness between the thoughts. So you become aware more of the field of awareness in which the thoughts arise is also present. And then a thought will come. And then you'll just note it as a thought and let it go. It may be that there isn't an immediate thought to follow that. And so you take note of that state as well, a state of pure stillness. And then wait for the next thought. So become aware that there is another part of you that it is not the thought stream. That's a key revelation for many people. When you don't do these kind of practices, you never think about what a thought actually is and what's occurring when thinking is occurring. And at the moment that we do a little simple exercise like that, you begin to become aware that there is another part of you that is separate from the thoughts. And we could call that just the awareness. And so the awareness is that which observes the thoughts. The awareness was the thing actually that was observing your breath in the previous exercise. And so the key with meditation is that we're becoming more and more familiar and more, you could say, enamored with this, or feeling at home with the state of just being aware, the awareness itself. Now, there's a very interesting thing with anxiety. What tends to happen is the awareness is like the rocket fuel. It's the fuel that energizes both thoughts, but it also, in a sense, you could say it energizes the state of stillness or peace as well. So it's your choice. And this is really the key point, is it's your choice. You may not have any choice over your external circumstances, but you generally have a choice over where you put your attention. So the attention becomes the tool. And the practice becomes one increasingly of strengthening your ability to choose where you allow your attention or your awareness to rest in any given moment. So I hope that's making sense. So with the previous practice where you just were tagging the thoughts, you were using the awareness to firstly notice that there was a thought and to tag it, let it go, but also to notice that there can be awareness without thought in the space between the thoughts. And that is also, a very natural state. And the meditators would say that's the state that we return to when we go into meditation. So that you're not, again, with all of this, we're not forcibly trying to manipulate the thought stream. We're not trying to push away the thoughts, because the key point here is that awareness will energize that which it touches. So if you're becoming hyper aware of your thoughts, particularly your anxious thoughts or your negative thoughts, what you're doing is you're actually energizing them, you're giving them more power over you. And if they carry an emotional payload, then of course what you're fueling is the emotional state as well. So by simply stepping back and watching and waiting and not fueling the ongoing stream of anxious thoughts, if you have the patience and the trust in the process, you can actually allow those thoughts will naturally subside of their own accord. Now, I mean, this isn't necessarily going to work for everyone all the time, but it's certainly a simple strategy that you can try and just see for yourself. We may not even be worrying about anxiety. I mean, that can be a pretty extreme state. Why don't we just talk about unhelpful thoughts or habitual thoughts? The big revelation is that often most people are not even aware that there is a separation between the awareness and the thought stream. They identify with the thoughts. In fact, it's a great fallacy, but they begin to believe that they are their thoughts. I don't know if you've ever had that sense that you can't separate your sense of self from the thoughts themselves, but in effect, that's what we're asking you to do, is to step back. Instead of being identified with the thoughts, step back and start to identify with that which observes the thoughts. Feel that that is more the authentic you. So let's try that now for a little moment. So we're closing our eyes again. And this time we're tuning into the awareness that notices the thoughts. So in the previous exercise, we were tagging the thoughts. Now in this exercise, we're actually moving outside or beyond the thought stream into the awareness itself. Another word for the awareness is just the sense of I am, without description. It's just the feeling of your own existence. It's another way of thinking of it. So there's the awareness. So meditation is really just the process of turning the awareness back on itself. So what we'll do now, just for a minute or two, is we're going to just be with the awareness, allow the awareness to rest within itself. And just see how that feels. Again, if thoughts come, that's fine. You just return the awareness back to the awareness. And if you feel a sense of stillness starting to rise up, a sense of peace, that's fine. You just retreat into that state. And you drop all the effort and you just rest there in that stillness. And then again, we return the awareness back to your senses Again, as you open the eyes, just notice how you feel now. You should feel a little bit, some people say they feel a little bit of detachment. But the key takeout there, and I had this very interesting sort of realization a couple of years ago. Why is it that people become so identified with their thoughts? Why do you believe your thoughts? Why do you allow your thoughts to have so much power over you? And it occurred to me, when you do a little simple exercise like that, the awareness for me carries with it a very powerful sense that that's who I am. I feel like that is who I am, is my awareness. The thoughts, though, are arising in that field of awareness. They arise up and then they subside, they dissolve back into it. But what happens for most people, I think, is that the carrying the sense of I am just as being, but the thoughts are occurring so frequently that they're getting tangled up, they're getting mixed up with the awareness itself. And so you begin to form the belief. It's sort of like you're getting a spillover effect of just the being me, and it's being permeated, it's being infiltrated by thoughts. And so we make the mistake of believing that we're the thoughts, because that sense of I carries in to what's immediately proximate to it. And so I think that's where the error in experience occurs that gives rise to all these, pathologies. It's because we start to believe that we are our emotions. We start to believe that we are our thoughts because they are interpenetrating, or they're sort of imbuing the field of awareness and taking it over. They're hijacking our awareness. And so the power of the little practice we just did is that you're starting to see that there can be a separation. That's what we're aiming to achieve here, a separation between the thought stream and the pure awareness itself. And then gradually over time, when you meditate every day, what happens is, by constant immersion within the awareness, you begin to feel more and more at home in that place. And then the rest of the activity is sort of a thing that's occurring on the periphery, and it's easier to de-identify with it. And that's what gives you the relief, or the release from the suffering, is this ability to move outside of the frame. Okay, now that you're feeling a little more focused and centered, I want you to recall a time where you felt very calm. So what we're going to do now is use a visualization where you're by the edge of a vast lake. And the lake is perfectly still. And the lake is so vast that you can't actually see the other side of it. It feels like it disappears off into infinity. And so you're sitting by the edge of this infinite lake. You're feeling very safe, very at ease, very much like you belong there. And I want you to try and sense that you are taking on the qualities of the lake as you sit by it. You begin to understand it. You begin to feel its vastness. It's absolute stillness. There's not a ripple on the lake. And so you're contemplating these qualities of vastness and perfect stillness. To the point where you surrender into the qualities of vastness and stillness. You sort of take on, you permit yourself, you give permission for yourself to become as vast and as still as this lake. Perhaps you can use your imagination to accept for the moment an idea that the lake is within you. That these qualities are naturally inherent in you. Just experiment with that feeling for a moment, see where it leads. You're actually effectively accepting the notion that within you is this sense, this field of great vastness and stillness. Just allow that feeling to expand. And just notice how that feels. Notice how the mind feels. When you remove all construct, all limits. So that's what's known as in Sanskrit, it's known as a dharana or a centering technique. And what we're effectively doing here is we're using our imagination in a constructive, in a positive way. So normally, when our imagination hijacks us in a destructive way, we can call that fear, or we can call it remorse for the past, or fear for something that hasn't happened in the future. And what's happening is the imagination is being used in a way that is unhelpful. It's creating creating within us unhelpful states of mind. But we can use the same imagination to bring about exalted states, very liberating states of being. And these can be circuit breakers for us. I think the power of this approach is that we're harnessing the creative power of imagination to restructure our experience of life, not necessarily in an unrealistic way, but perhaps just in a way that is more productive for us, more conducive to happiness. And it gives us this relief valve where we can take the pressure out of the anxious moment, or even out of the drama of somebody else's situation. Is that we just disengage from the negativity, and we just recreate within ourselves just a remembrance of a previous state within ourselves that was very expansive, very calm, very joyful. And so what we're doing is we're reconditioning. What we're trying to do is overwrite, if you like, what trauma it may end up being is like a damaged sector on a hard drive, on a disk. And we're overriding that more and more. We're retraining the mind to return to more positive experiences. And this is a bit of a process, but I think if you can combine a more productive and constructive application of imagination to a return to states of being that are more joyful. You know, there is a thing in neuroscience they call neuroplasticity, where the experience within life itself will shape the structure of the brain. And so you develop pathologies where trauma will cause changes within the limbic system that then become self-perpetuating, and you get changes to the hippocampus and the amygdala and other organs within the brain that are maintaining high states of arousal and anxiety, even when there is no external cause. And so that's a pretty powerful sort of demonstration of how entertaining fearful states can actually give rise to self-fulfilling states of fear. But fortunately, the neuroplastic changes can work in reverse, and you can actually de-energize those processes, and you can start to build psychological resilience through the holding of more positive attitudes. I know it's easier said than done, but I think the key is to firstly to step back out of a tense situation. So you use the earlier techniques we use today to just remove yourself from the sort of captivating stream of negative thoughts. That's step one, is to just retreat back into the awareness. And then if you like, step two is once you're in that sort of safer space, then you might use the imagination to actually create within yourself a very positive, expansive experience. And the more that you can hold that, you will actually start to change the neurology. So that's something that you can work with anyway and try. Now, we've got about 15 minutes left. I think we're going to open it up for some questions now. It looks like everyone's too relaxed. Krish?
Hi, Peter.
How do you feel?
It's leading to more towards silence for me.
You feel the silence?
Yeah, I feel, yeah.
Positive experience?
Yeah, it's very positive.
Less thoughts troubling you?
Yeah, thoughts keep coming anyway, but just got the experience of what you call just the glimpse of that gap between the thoughts.
Is the silence still with you now?
Yes.
You can still feel to some degree?
Yes, I think back of my, I think deep down me, I can feel that silence is just there.
That's the key to this. So it's a really interesting observation, is the more that you do this immersion practice, you go in and out of the state, what you find is that the stillness follows you back out and it begins to integrate. And that's really the aim of this. The long-term aim of these processes is not really just a binary state where you're either calm or you're not, but overall we're trying to reformat the neurology and the experience of life so that you're just generally more calm, even throughout activity. So creating a new default state of calmness. So when you say that you still feel some silence now, it's because there's an integration that's occurring because you're doing regular practice.
Wow.
Good.
Thank you, Peter.
Anyone else feel something similar?
Yeah, I'll share for a moment, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, like, it was interesting when you talk about the anxiety and stepping back and looking at it. And like, you know, in the last few years, I had suffered some pretty bad anxiety, which had panic attacks and things like that. I'm pretty much all over on top of that now, but still comes a little bit. So, you know, yeah, stepping back and looking at it, you know, that's an interesting way to sort of to deal with it. So rather than it feed itself, because it doesn't feed itself, it's like a nuclear furnace. Like the more you start thinking about it, it can lead into those moments. Like I've in the past, I called an ambulance, you know, a couple of years ago. I've got it to that bad when you think
wow.
that you're having a heart attack or something like that when you're not. But so the anxiety can be pretty real. And I'm a little bit calmer about something. Like just now, I've got to do a few hours. I'm doing part-time uni at the moment, and I've got an assignment that's due this afternoon or tonight, and I've got to finish it off today. And I was worrying a little bit more, thinking, oh man, I've left it, to this last minute. But now I'm not really sort of chilled out because I've got plenty of time. You know what I mean? Like what I've got left of it. So I was a little bit worried earlier this morning when I was sort of doing my morning chores and that. And now I'm just sort of thinking to myself, I'm pretty relaxed about it. I've nothing to worry about.
So the anxiety is not really going to help you. I mean, the deadline's going to be there irrespective of whatever your state of mind is.
Yeah.
The question is whether feeling anxious about it is really going to help you or not. They do say that a certain amount of stress can be motivating.
Yep.
So there's the original researcher Hans Selye, who I think was I can't remember which part of Europe he was from, but he was talking about positive stress. He called it eustress, EU stress, and then the negative stress he called distress. So there is actually a level of stress that can be motivating, that gives you that sense of needing to get something done. But the key is to not step over the line into distress where you feel overwhelmed by that. And if you're attentive, you can know when you're getting to that line and you can pull back. Because once you get into the distress, then it's actually negatively affecting your productivity. So it's actually working in reverse.
Yeah, if you get to that point where the panic starts to fire up a little bit, no good, yeah. So
Yeah.
But, a little bit of stress is good. I get that.
A little bit. But we'd call it, I mean, I don't even like calling it stress. I'd call it sort of, I don't know, a sense of an imperative, let's say, a sense of drive.
Yeah, you're probably better not to call it stress, right? Like it's a task you've got to complete, you've got to do it. Like you've just got to do it. It's not really stress. But yeah, just to sum up on that, yeah, like I was driving to Noosa this morning and I was sort of thinking, oh man, I've got to answer all these questions of that. I should have done a bit more yesterday. Sort of just ticking a little bit, but worrying about it. But just now, I'm calm and cool about it. It's all good, and I'll do it better and answer those things properly. So yeah.
Well, it was a good investment of an hour this morning, even though it took you away from your study. Hopefully, you can come back into it now with a bit more enthusiasm and maybe a bit more focus as well, is what we're.
Yeah, I think there's a bit more focus. So
yeah, great. Anyone else got any comments or feedback?
I found something when we were doing the tagging thoughts.
Yeah.
So I overthink quite a lot, and I've got more of a sort of thought train that always goes on. It's always ongoing. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. Don't worry, it's not COVID.
I hope not.
So I found during sort of the thought process, even though I was tagging most of them because it was some of the things that I had to do or things that I've written down for today that I had to do, I found some of them came up like I thought of sort of something that I love. And I felt like I didn't want to tag it, but instead I sort of just hugged it and embraced it. And it made me it felt a little bit better because instead of tagging as a thought, I've tagged it as a feeling.
Right.
And I don't know, it helped even more.
Great. I mean, in a way, you were combining the second and third technique there, the lake technique of where you're absorbing a positive feeling is really, it's still a thought. I mean, the whole imagination is still thought, but we're harnessing it in a way that is more constructive for us. It's going to lift us out of feeling anxious or feeling sad, is to go to something happier. There's a very ancient yogi called Patanjali that lived around about 150 BC, and he would say he was one of the first psychologists, you could say. He would say something like, if you're feeling a certain emotion that you don't want to feel, then see if you can identify the opposite emotion to that. So he said, embrace the opposite of that unhelpful state. And even if it's just a theoretical exercise to begin with. So if you're feeling, what's an example? If you're feeling resentment for a situation, like people that are feeling resentful that they're in lockdown, what's the opposite sentiment to resentment? You might think
Freedom.
it's freedom, or you might think it's like, I think of gratitude. So you feel grateful for the things that you can do still. And he would say, bring the mind to rest, to embrace that positive feeling of gratitude and just be with that. And he said it will have a good effect on you because it'll weaken the power of the feeling of resentment. Because it's like, it goes back to our original principle that where the awareness goes, the energy flows. So if the awareness is feeding resentment, thoughts of resentment, then that will become ingrained. But if you can pull back, firstly, tag it so you observe what's happening. Then secondly, say, use the power of your will, the power of intention to say, this is an unhelpful state. Let's see if I can identify the opposite feeling and let's embrace that for a while. Even if it's just an imaginary exercise. The thing is that interestingly, the brain cannot differentiate between a real threat and an imagined threat. In terms of the limbic system and the activation of all our defenses, our imagination is as powerful an influence on our state of being as if there were actually physical threats. And that's the reason, if you go to a horror movie or, anything that's going to bring about a state of arousal and anxiety in you, you will feel, you'll have all the concomitants, the counterparts of your elevated heart rate, hair will stand on end, the pupils dilate, all the stuff that would be happening if you were in that actual situation. So, I mean, we're well aware of the power of imagination, but how well are we utilizing it in a constructive way? So that's really the invitation and the opportunity here. These are all mind hacks that the yogis have developed over thousands of years, and we're bringing them back and we're reapplying them to current day situations. Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left. Why don't we just finish with a little quick 1 minute return to the state of stillness. So we'll close our eyes again. So you can either return to the breath or just to a passive observation of the mind stream. And just observe that flow of awareness. The key to all of this is really just this becoming familiar with this condition of just pure awareness. And another enhancement you can do, which I find useful, again, it's linked to the neurology and the physiology. Try smiling, or even doing like the Buddha would often, they would have statues, pictures of the Buddha, and he has this half smile. Try just feeling the awareness with a half smile on your face. Allow the corners of the lips to move up. See how that feels. Just notice the shift. Or you might even just imagine that you're smiling inside. Okay. Return the awareness to the outside. You can open the eyes again. Did you notice a feeling then? Something changed? Don't underrate the power of these techniques. They seem simple. They're very deceptive. They're deceptively simple, but they're also deceptively powerful. You'll know how you feel right now when you just did that. You come out again. It's how you feel afterwards that is the proof of the power of these techniques. And the other thing, of course, will be the regular practice. It's like in these talks I give at the meditation center, Narelle will remember, and Kalyani, they talk about dyeing fabric. So they're using these ancient metaphors. And if you want to dye a fabric, what they'll do is they'll dip the fabric. Let me reappear like magic. They dip the fabric in the vat of dye. And each time they dip in the fabric, it begins to take on the color of the dye itself. This is the dyeing process, not the dyeing process. That's another, not less preferable process, but the dyeing process of the coloration of a cloth through repeated immersion is a metaphor that they use with this process of constant return and immersion in the state of stillness, in this return to the state of pure awareness, is that over time you begin to take on the characteristics of that state where you allow the mind to dwell. So wherever you allow the mind, the awareness to dwell, to rest, over time you take on those qualities. It's not hard to appreciate that dynamic. If you're focusing on negative news all the time and fear, you'll become fearful. If you focus more on peace and compassion, kindness, helping other people, reading uplifting stories, or even humor and comedy and laughter, all of these things, where you allow the mind to rest, that's what you become. So it's we're more powerful than we realize. We have the options of not always changing the external circumstances, but we can always exert some choice as to where we allow our awareness to go. So that's really the big takeout from today. So I'd like to thank you all, and then I look forward to talking to you again on Zoom, if not in person, sooner rather than later.